Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Our theme music is provided by Mason. You can find her website at masonmusic.com. That's MAESYN. We are here with Esther Newton and Jean Carlomusto. Thank you so much for being here as part of the Provincetown International Film Festival. I'm really excited to have you ladies here and to be talking about this important work. Esther Newton, Made Me Gay is the name of your documentary, and you are the subject.
I am.
and you're a cultural anthropologist.
Correct.
You've done really important work for the gay communities and for feminism in general.
Yes.
And I'm really excited to be here with you. Your film is showing again Saturday, June 18th at 7 p.m. at the Water's Edge Cinema. And I would love for you to tell us how you met and what compelled you to tell her story.
Well, Esther and I have known each other for about 30 years at this point, and we are a family in terms of queer family because we share an act, and on both sides, on her current, on her spouse's side as well. So I'd known her. At a certain point, I recognized that Esther made it possible for me to be gay. What? I mean, well, you made a space for people to be queer. I mean, you were one of the first people who were looking at queer culture and writing about it and saying, wait, this is valid.
That's true.
Drag queens in the Midwest, this is a culture. And as an anthropologist, I'm going to study it. I'm going to use all the skills that I was trained with, and I'm going to put out the best possible ethnography of drag queens that's possible. And pre-Stonewall, this was pretty rad.
It was very rad, yes.
And so I really, I thought in so many ways, you were a pioneer in terms of not just sexuality, but gender studies, yes. Both of them. You always had an expansive view of these issues. So you never became dated. I mean, significant. I never saw you really get dated because you were always thinking expansively. And that's a rare quality. So that's why I wanted to do the film. And I put you on the spot, didn't I?
It wouldn't be the first time.
So can you talk about for those who weren't there, can you talk about the climate that you grew up in terms of gender identity?
Well, I was born in 1940. And the climate was horrible. My parents were left-wing, so there was anti-communism. And not that long after I was born, like in the 50s, late 40s and early 50s, was the whole lavender scare where homosexuals were hounded out of government, the State Department and all kinds of things, raids. It was a really tough time to grow up gay. And it took me a lot longer than I think and hope that it takes young queer people today to feel pretty confident about who they are and who they want to hang out with. It took me a long time.
In the film, you talk about how even standing certain ways was kind of taboo, like there was a level of policing gender identity to that extent that it was
everything. It was the way you held your hands. It was the way you walked. It was everything. And Jean has a little piece in the film where when I was in graduate school, and by that time it was in the 1960s, I got this message through my advisor that we don't think you're really committed to anthropology because you wear pants too much. I mean, that was the level.
Right. And can you talk about anthropology at that time?
Anthropology at that time, I will say, it probably saved my life in a lot of ways as an intellectual framework for understanding the world. Institutionally, it was completely male-dominated. And I will say this gives also something of the time that I went through 4 years of college and 6 years of graduate school, and I never had one single female professor.
That is quite amazing.
That was the atmosphere in which you had to try to succeed, which most women did not succeed.
Before we talk with you, Jean, about your whole mission with the telling of this story, Esther, can you talk about trying to conform to a heterosexual lifestyle?
Well, as far as gay, I was
Professional
totally in the closet. I mean, I went through 6 years of graduate school, and I told exactly 2 people, one of whom a woman I was having an affair with, and the other one was a gay man, that I was gay. 6 years. And I had friends, we would play cards, we would drink together, we would do this stuff. And there was always the unsaid and the unspeakable. Were probably 2 different levels that I was trying to deal with. And I really did try to be some kind of heterosexual, somewhat passable woman until really the end of those graduate school years. So by now we're talking about 1968, 69. So that really stunts your growth, your psychological growth. And it's really tragic for young queer people to try to be something they're not for so many years, or hide, But in my case, I was actively trying, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
Didn't work.
So, Jean, can you talk about your mission behind telling this story?
Well, I wanted to tell Esther's story because she's a compelling character. Esther is very sincere. What you see is what you get. And that's a great thing when you're doing a portrait of someone, for someone to just be themselves. So in that way, she's a good vehicle. I don't want to objectify you too much. But, the other thing is that Esther lived through some key periods in history. And I wanted to preserve that history. And when you want to put history out there, I know I've been teaching for 30 years in a university. You want to try and humanize it, or you want to make it something that people can relate to. And so her story brought me the opportunity to go through drag culture in the 1960s, to go through the birth of lesbian feminism. I mean, I was always so impressed that, you and Louise Fishman were hanging out with Jill Johnston, up there totally thinking about the lesbian feminist mission. And through this, you are trying to figure out, your sexuality, which is forbidden in lesbian feminism. As a butch woman, you were considered very retrograde in lesbian feminism. So it's like she had to sort of navigate her way through these important historical periods, and the obstacles she was jumping over were key in defining who we are. Like, lesbian feminism had to deal with butch femme, all of this, or not, and just change, or people had to go on to something else. So that was important. And then, of course, her looking into the history of Cherry Grove, what makes queer space? How did this space get here? And these are some of the questions that Esther always asks that to me are fascinating. As an anthropologist, she's always looking at things through an idea of cultural relativity. It doesn't have to be this way. Why is it this way? Why have people formed it this way? How is it changing? And I would say too, I think it's so important to realize that nothing is fixed. We are still changing. Who we are is not etched in stone. So I think the best possible and the most agile course of going through all of this is to recognize that there isn't fixity and that we are changing. And also, given this, how do we go forward? I think it's just really important to understand our history as we navigate forward, because otherwise people don't understand, for instance, how hard it was for folks like Esther. And I would say even later on, 10 years later for me, it was not, you couldn't be out in college. So understanding that this atmosphere we have right now, or this, hopefully, this more open environment is a result of a lot of people's efforts, and that it's important for us to be in tune with that history. That's why I made the piece.
And it's important for young people to understand you have to make efforts or we're going to lose. They need to understand where we came from, which was a really terrible place for queers, to understand what we had to do to get where we are now, which is once again threatened. And if we do nothing and we don't stand up against it, we're going to lose what we want.
Can you talk about the performative nature of gender identity and your relationship to drag? How it first moved you?
I had steered away from, I first encountered the gay community when I was 19. And I fell in love with it. But at the same time, I was so afraid. I just couldn't imagine how I could have the scholarly career that I wanted to have. And there was no possibility of being open about, or even having a life. How could that be possibly navigated? In order to fit in enough, so I think I always made straight people sort of uncomfortable, but to fit in enough to have them let me jump through the hoops that I had to jump through, I had to hide whole aspect, not just that, oh, well, I have a woman partner, but my natural being. And it's like some people may be familiar with Ann Lister and Gentleman Jack and all that stuff. But, Ann Lister said, this is the way I am. And God made me this way. I don't believe in God, but this is the way I am. And how I am now is the way that I always should have been. And I couldn't be because there was so much pressure and so many barriers. So I'm so grateful to the gay community because it's important to recognize people who are able to achieve stuff. But so, like Jean said before, so many people did so much and sacrificed so much that we've been able to move forward as a group.
I saw Pink Flamingos for I don't know how many times I did. But I was watching Divine's performance last night and I was thinking, of course there are tons of campy parts. It's ironic, it's all these different things. And all the other characters are more extreme, but her character actually, to me, is like the most grounded character.
Yes.
And the most realistic character. And there's something in her emotional tone that to me makes it feel like it's not so much satirical or...
It's not exactly an act.
Yeah, it feels like an extension of her feminine identity or,
Right.
And I know that, people like to make the distinction between this is a drag performance, I'm a man, this is a character I play. But from another film I saw too, Percy Judy, filmmaker, and I talked about this, it's like he sees it too as in his film, his character, Judy, for him, drag is actually an extension of his gender fluidity and his gender identity. And I was actually really moved by the emotional tone because I felt that was what's compelling. So even though people talk, there's a lot, about the silliness and, of it. To me, there's like this whole other level that I don't think people are really necessarily thinking about or talking about.
Well, I was interested in where I started with this. Why did I write about drag? Why did I hang out with drag queens? I started out saying the community was so important to me that I could find my way back to it. But on a personal, individual level, because of what I talked about before of trying to hide and dissemble and be, act more feminine which felt unnatural to me, I related to drag on that level. I felt like I had been a female impersonator in a different way than what they were. And I also talked in my book, Mother Camp, about the inside and outside, like how it was a double thing, that this outside is a performance, but at the same time, it's me. And my inside is also me. And these things play back and forth in drag identity. So, and I love drag. It's just, it's a real deep expression of gay identity.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people relate to the idea that their gender feels at times performative or at times, I don't want to say inauthentic, but that it's a play. You know, I think that a lot of people don't subscribe to the gender binary and traditional gender roles.
There's a moment in the film where Esther comes to this place and she says, I want to be who I was able to become. And I think that's just a critical part of our mission here. You know, what you're talking about, what Esther's work is about, the reason I made the film is to allow people this kind of space to become who they are, because there are so many pressures and you know, navigating it, particularly, you know, when you're looking at the lens of history and Esther's time period, was extremely difficult. And it took a great deal of agility. And that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to include the dogs and the dog agility in it, because not only were dogs essential to Esther, to who she is, like at her heart. I mean, I think of, you know, you're a dog. You know, it's, as you say, it's not only...
It's in my DNA.
It is in your DNA. But you have had to be very agile to get to where you are today.
And folks are going to have to see the film to know all about the dogs and how they play into it. But your mother bred dogs,
yes.
And it was a big part of your relationship with your mother and
True.
How you related to her.
Yes.
And the separation caused, but also the commonality.
Indeed.
So folks need to check out Esther Newton Made Me Gay. Really awesome work. And your work is fantastic. And thank you so much for doing what you do. So how are folks going to see this outside of the film fest?
Coming up in a couple of weeks, the Frameline Festival in San Francisco will have a streaming option, so folks can see it that way.
Excellent.
For $10. A bargain.
Yeah, a bargain for sure. So that's happening. Folks can see it here at Water's Edge Cinema on Saturday at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at Pandora@WOMR.org.